This is AgGrad Live,
We have all of the different segments within the cotton.
the show that explores what it's really like to work in the ag industry,
So making sure that we get policy and regulatory issues
straight from the people who live it every day. All right, AgGrad Nation, we are back with another episode of AgGrad Live. This is the first episode that's live from Wyoming. We are spending a little bit of time up here in Wyoming, so I hope all of our technical details fall into place and everything comes across great. If you can't see me or hear me, I guess leave a message in the comments at any point. But very excited for our guest today. We took a break last week for 4th of July. And I'll just, in case through the holiday you forgot, this show is also a podcast and a YouTube. So make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel and AgGrad Live on your favorite podcast player. But as I said, very excited for today's guest because it is a world that I didn't know existed before I got into AgGrad and started figuring out how to make a website work and all of that good stuff. We have on the show Kelly Stanze, and she is a search strategist for a major corporation and also a side hustler. And we're going to get to talk about both today. But Kelly, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
I am excited, Kelly. Are you excited?
Oh, always. Enthusiasm is my middle name.
Good. Well, first of all, I think it's important that we start off with what is a search strategist?
So there's technically two major sides of search strategy. There's organic and paid. Often you'll hear paid called PPC or pay-per-click. Usually I just call it paid search. My day-to-day life actually focuses on the organic side. So you type something into the search bar in Google. You hope that your website shows up in the first page naturally without paying for it. That's what I do. And we call that search engine optimization, or SEO for short. And that's essentially the act of creating a website that is seen favorably in the eyes of search engines because it's, one, well built technically, and two, provides content that is useful and valuable to people who had a need that drove them to the internet in the first place. So, long story short, have a good site.
Have a good website and people will find you. Now, did you just grow up just loving to do search engine optimization and loving the internet, or how does one become a search strategist?
Well, I was born in 1990, so I am considered a digital native. But early internet users might remember a thing called GeoCities. I was actually teaching myself HTML on GeoCities when I was 12 years old. So doing my first web builds before, web design was really a thing anyone was thinking about. But I initially went to college for interactive design. So anything that can be absorbed visually over the internet, I know how to do. Or I did when I used it before the twisting road of life brought me to where I am at. So, yeah, at one point in time, I had to take classes on podcasting. So this is kind of a nice walk down memory lane.
Well, tell me about that twisting road. I know that's something we're going to get more into here, but I know when I asked you ahead of time, like, hey, what advice would you like to share with folks in the AgGrad community? You mentioned kind of like using surprises to your advantage. And that was something new that hadn't come up before. And I'm curious, can you just tell us what you mean, like using surprises to your advantage in your career?
Yeah. So my life is nothing like what I thought it would be. When I graduated high school, I thought I was going to get like a graphic design or communications degree, move back to my hometown, marry my high school sweetheart, live on a farm. And, I had everything planned out because, of course, I knew exactly what I was doing. Come college, that graphic design or interactive design program that I was in accidentally landed my first ag internship. And, I'd been around ag in some capacity my whole life, but when Illinois Corn approached me on Twitter and said, hey, we're looking for ag bloggers that want to run sites for us. Would you be in for it? I said, yeah, why not? It'd been a while.
So hold on. I have to stop you right there, though.
Yeah.
Illinois Corn approached you on Twitter. So you have to give us more details. Why? So, I have nobody approaching me on Twitter asking me to run their social media. I guess that probably speaks more to my Twitter than anything else. But how did that happen?
Well, it was the early days of Twitter, and it was the early days of hashtag AgChat. So it was much smaller community, and it was really, really easy for college students to be seen then. I think it's a lot noisier now, but it was a small enough world that, I was actively tweeting enough. I was involved enough in the community that they were just like, hey, we've got this internship program going on. We've got a few other interns that we're bringing in to run other things. Would you want to start a site for us? And I started a blog called Midwestern Gold. And I wrote about corn farming in Illinois and in the heartland. And it was just this crazy, surreal, surprise experience. And one thing led to another. And by the end of college, I had 6 internships, 5 of which were in agriculture.
Oh, wow.
And again, I was the president of my school's FFA chapter, but I did not think ag was going to be a part of my career. So that's big surprise number 1. Number 2, things did not work out with a high school sweetheart, obviously. So I'm a junior in college trying to figure out how to get a fresh start, and I get approached about an internship in Wisconsin. So I spent a winter living in Wisconsin. Don't recommend that. It was a great experience, but the weather was awful. And then next thing that happens, someone named Katie Pinky approaches me again via Twitter and says, hey, I want to interview you for an internship in California. We want you to travel the state teaching farmers how to use Twitter. Now, again, my degree was in graphic design. That was not what I set out to be doing.
What made you say yes?
Newly single 21-year-old girl looking for amazing experiences who wouldn't say yes to living in Sacramento. So I took the job, and it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. So finish the internship, go back to the Chicago area to finish my degree. They offer me a full-time job. I say yes. And they're like, well, there's a caveat. We can't afford to pay you what it would take for you to live in California. So how do you feel about Kansas City? I said, yeah, I think I can do that. A year and a half later, I get laid off from that job. End up leaving agriculture to work at another advertising agency because getting work mattered more than whatever industry it was in. And I ended up leaving the social media side of things and becoming an SEO strategist on the agency side.
Well, sorry,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it was the best blessing in disguise ever because, I liked doing social media. I absolutely love doing search. It is my calling. It was what I was meant to do. And it never would have happened if I hadn't lost that first job out of college.
That's pretty cool. It's hard to see that at the time that, hey, this is all going to work out for the best. It's something people say. It's like, sure, easy for you to say, but it's always cool to hear stories of when it actually does happen. But I'm curious. All right. So first of all, you mentioned a couple different internships that you got through Twitter, one of which ended up leading into a job. You also mentioned that it's a lot noisier now than it used to be. Yeah. Do you have any advice for people who might want to leverage social media to advance their career about just general tips of things that they should or should not do?
Yeah, fine.
And I'm springing this on you. I'm sorry. I didn't
No, you're fine.
warn you for this, but I think it's really an interesting idea to explore.
No, find pockets of conversation. So all it took for me was really getting involved in the AgChat hashtag. And I was actually an intern for the AgChat Foundation when they were founded. So that was a really cool experience. Obviously, a lot of things have changed since that first year that we were a thing. But just by being involved in a very tight-knit Twitter community, I ended up getting, my first handful of internships. Finding mentors, even if it's just someone that you tweet with, exchange emails with, connect with on LinkedIn, and touch base with now and then, that can make such a huge difference. Building up those first few references on your resume is actually really hard. So if you put yourself out there and build those networks early, you have someone to turn to.
I think that's such an important point, though. That last one, though, because if there's one question I get, and actually AgGrad is founded probably on this question, which is how am I supposed to get experience when I have no experience? And I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, it used to be you had to go through one gatekeeper. Like at every company, there was one gatekeeper. And now you can really expand that network through social media and actually have some relationships ahead of time, so that, yeah, you're not going to have the experience, but you might still, have a relationship that can get you that experience.
Yeah. And admittedly at the time, like, I wasn't super strategic about my networking or who I was meeting. I just was really passionate about the community and loved the conversations and the people I had met. So it just kind of blossomed naturally. But I think what really happened was I tried to bring the best version of myself to the community because I cared about it. And that ended up, reaping some rewards. So just go out there and be a good person in your professional network, and usually things end up coming back to you.
Okay, I think that's really good advice, but it also can be hard to follow. Like, what is the actionable advice to being a good person? Are there any things that you've noticed, either people doing that exceptionally well or exceptionally poorly, that you could point out?
I think it's hard because there's a lot of people in the space that use Twitter just for fun, and it ends up being a representation of the agriculture industry. And those people maybe aren't behaving the best. And we've all seen it, like the people talking down about city consumers or cracking jokes about organics folks. I'm not one of those people that believes in pitting people against each other. So that's probably one of my biggest pet peeves about what I see on social media, at least in the agriculture space right now. But as far as what you can do right, it's really building bridges, like reaching out to people who have questions or seeking out the people who have something to offer you. And maybe instead of just expecting something for free from them, free mentorship, essentially, understand that their time is valuable and think about what kind of value you can give to them as well. So for me, it was, I can give you cheap labor helping you build a blog for the Illinois corn growers. And then it was, well, I know how to do video. I can maybe help teach people how to do video editing and that sort of stuff. It was really just kind of building up your social equity in the space and just really lifting up others where I could, if that makes sense. I don't know. I'm kind of a hippie. I'm very touchy-feely, like be a decent human being. And I personally feel like most of my fortune in my career has come back to me because of that.
Yeah, no, I believe it 100%. You put value out in the world and good things inevitably start coming your way. I really do believe that as well. And I heard something on, I think it was maybe Tim Ferriss's podcast, where he said that it's impossible to be curious and angry at the same time. And that really just kind of stuck with me. It's like, on social media, like being a good person on social media, if you can just be curious and be like, I'd really like to understand kind of what you mean by that. It's almost impossible to come across like a jerk if you're coming across sincerely curious.
Yep. Always have a thirst to learn. And usually what I find is that other people who are passionate about the same topics as you are just as excited about your thirst to learn as you are. And I think that's part of where some of my early mentorship opportunities came from. Like, these are people that saw a young person that was just as passionate about the mission they were on as they were. And it's like, okay, cool. I think I want to interact with this person. This is a great idea.
Yeah. That's cool. I think people are going to start accusing me of clickbait, though. On the title of this video, we're talking about side hustles, and I've been taking us on totally different tangents. I do want to talk about it. So during the day, for those of you who maybe didn't catch the beginning of the video, during the day, you're kind of like a superhero, right? During the day, you wear one role, and then in the evening, a totally different one. You have your own business on the side. So how does that work? I think some people are nervous about, well, what does your boss think of that? And also just kind of how has that worked for you?
Well, the biggest thing is understanding when it comes to dealing with your daytime employer, understanding where conflict of interest lies. Like, I am very, very conscientious to only take on freelance clients that have absolutely no interaction with my corporate job. And, my superiors know I do it. It's not really a fact that I hide at all. And they're comfortable with it because what I do in the evenings and on the weekends is never going to interfere with what I'm doing during the day or compete with it. So that's the biggest thing, just making sure that it's supported in your environment. And if it's not, understanding where the boundaries are, like why is it not supported and in what situations would it be? You know, when I was an agency person, like freelancing was pretty much off the table unless you were working in a completely different industry. So when I was working in higher education, I did do some ag freelancing and it was a blast. And when I was in agriculture, I did some other random small business freelancing and always enjoyed it. So it's about finding those gaps between your day job and the need that you can fulfill outside of it and making sure that it's kind of within that window that's allowed. And as far as balancing it, I don't know if I'm the best person to talk about this because I'm kind of a workaholic. I don't know. I love it. My side hustle stuff just gives me so much fire in my belly and ignites me so much for what I do in a different capacity that even when things get kind of crazy, I make time for it. And if things are too crazy, the cool thing about the side hustle is unless you have an emergency going on, you can't hit the pause button. And I make a point to work with good clients that are flexible and willing to let me step away for a week if I'm having a crazy week at the day job or I want to take a vacation or I have morning sickness like crazy, which is super relevant right now. So you really have to spend some time, you know, obviously talking with your day job, but also figuring out just what works for you. With the 6 years that I've been doing freelancing off and on, I've learned a lot about the kind of clients I don't want to work with, the kind of scheduling I don't want to do, the kind of breaks I have to build in for myself. And once you kind of go through the hard knocks and figure things out, it actually becomes pretty seamless, in my opinion.
Well, I want to ask you about getting clients, but before I do, I think there's probably people watching or listening that are thinking, okay, yeah, if I knew design and digital strategy and search strategy, maybe I could, you know, have a side business as well. But, you know, what if my skills lie elsewhere? How would you advise someone going through about like, what opportunities might there be for me to have a side business? Like me, I have no skills, right? So what would I do? What would I do as a side business?
Skills.
But I mean, no, maybe like just in general, you know, I think there's people who think, okay, for marketing people, side hustles are great, but what about for, you know, construction people or, I mean, you name it, others that are in different industries.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's really easy to think that a side hustle is limited to like kind of white collar jobs, but how many farmers do you know that are out there doing cartage work on the side? Like, true. I know grain farmers that turn around and in the off season they use their grain trucks to haul watermelon. So if there's a will to make money, there's usually a way to monetize whatever you have. The biggest part, I think, of figuring out where the opportunity is just doing your research, whether you're having like face-to-face conversations with people in casual settings or you're talking to, again, mentors who maybe you really respect and you think they've got a good pulse on where the opportunity might be. Or, and I know this is going to sound super biased, but Google it. Just get online and do some research and see if there are people on forums or on Twitter or on social media complaining about how there's not someone offering what it is you have to offer. And if, you know, people are complaining about a gap that you maybe don't know how to fill right now, but you think you could, start working toward learning how to fill it. You know, maybe it's someone wanting a very specific kind of painting job done on their fence and no one's offering it in your area. And suddenly you're like, hey, I have the supplies I need how to do this. I need to do something like this. I think I just need to learn how to do it a little bit better. Start practicing, like get out there and do it. They say it takes, I think is it 10,000 hours, 100,000 hours? I shouldn't be quoting things.
It's more than I've spent, I'm sure. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. But it's a well-known fact. It takes time to master something. Yeah. And, you know, I'm an expert in search engines, but I'm not a master at it, if that makes sense. Right. So part of why I enjoy the side hustle is it gives me more practice that I don't get in my more structured day-to-day life. So when I was first starting to do this on the side, it was a lot of like growing pains and bumps and bruises along the way while I figured out how this actually is something that I can do for small businesses on shoestring budgets.
Right. And I think if you're upfront with them about, hey, here's where I'm at, here's what I've done in the past, you know, you don't have to say I am the best fence painter that ever lived. You could say, look, I've done that. I can do that for you. Here's a reasonable price. I do think most people, whether they realize it or not, if they wanted to have a side hustle or a side business, they have the skills that they need to monetize, even if it's just, driving Uber or something like that to get started.
Yep.
But what about for you, especially when you have to find clients in a different industry than you work in? Do you have a set process you go through? I know you mentioned doing research, but any tips there as far as finding people to work for if you wanted to start a side business?
There's a few different ways you can do this. I've been really fortunate in that all of my clients find me through word of mouth. And it's actually funny. I do work for a pediatric dentist right now that's local to the area of Kansas City I live in. And I was introduced to them through a friend of a friend. I get to the first meeting, the first face-to-face meeting. They hadn't told me his name. He's actually someone I run with every week.
Oh, wow.
It was an actual friend of mine who didn't understand what I did at my day job and didn't know that I was freelancing in that same space. So he was like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm meeting with you. You're my client now, man." But there's actually some really good websites out there where you can actually network specifically for the purpose of picking up side hustle work. Upwork is one of them. I'm not currently on it, but I have considered getting on it a few times just because we are in saving mode right now, because raising tiny humans is apparently incredibly expensive.
I can testify to that. Yes.
Yeah. So my husband and I are actually both freelancing right now. Where I'm on the organic side, he is actually on the paid side. He's a PPC strategist. So he does a lot of the word of mouth, freelancing forums and website stuff. Sometimes it's as simple as putting yourself on Craigslist, which sounds really, really shady and weird, but there's people out there looking for everything on Craigslist. Someone might be looking for you.
It's very possible. So I'm sure there's been probably this joke has been made a lot of times, but so you and your husband, did you find each other through Google? You're both search strategists. How do two search strategists find each other?
Actually, we met on Match.com.
Okay. Well, so yeah. You probably optimized your profiles there, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm wearing the shirt that I was wearing in the profile picture that caught his attention. Note that it's Avengers, by the way.
Very cool. What about, so one thing you brought up earlier, and you kind of alluded to it in a passing comment, but I think it's really helpful because I hear a lot like, hey, I want to start a side business, but I'm worried about what my employer will think of it. There's actually some benefits to employer of you starting a side business. Maybe it's you're going to learn skills. Maybe it's actually in your case, you get to indulge something you're interested in that you don't get at your day job. And so maybe over time, if you didn't have the side business, you'd start to get restless in your day job because you weren't kind of indulging in that sort of thing. So I think that's often overlooked concern about maybe starting a side business. But any other pieces of advice you'd have for anyone out there listening or watching that thinks, man, I'm really entrepreneurial. I'd really like to do something, but I just don't know how to get started.
Yeah. The biggest struggle is finding that first client. Obviously, everyone needs a portfolio when they're getting started or, work history. If you can get your foot in the door with one, you're usually pretty well set. And that sounds easier said than done. It's actually the hardest part is getting started. Mm-hmm. But the great news is if you've got that good network, if you've been putting good out there in the world, it usually, again, ends up helping you because some of my first freelance clients were actually just friends that knew, hey, you work in search, right? Is this something you do on the side? Would you be interested in helping us out? And, 400 optimized bacon recipes later, I had this really, really great freelance client that I could point to in my portfolio and say, hey, by the way, I have extensive pork industry experience now. Or, I've optimized this many recipes in my freelance career, and I think I can probably help you guys get your Eat Pork blog found in some capacity.
So if we Google bacon recipes right now, we will find you.
Maybe, yeah. I've actually, what's really interesting about my side hustle, and I keep it this way on purpose, is I'm kind of a ghost. You don't know that I've worked on your site unless you're the one paying me.
Yeah.
I try not to leave fingerprints because ultimately those fingerprints kind of get in the way of the authenticity of the site itself.
Mm-hmm.
So you may see a site that I've optimized, but you would probably never know it.
Sure. No, it makes sense. We do have a question here from Callie Curley. She's asking, are there steps to take to avoid any conflict of interest issues with your full-time employer when you do similar work? So is stepping outside of the industry sort of your only choice? I know you had mentioned earlier about just drawing those boundaries with your employer, saying, hey, look, I'd like to start doing stuff like this. Where is that boundary? Any other advice on that?
Well, so my current employer is the only corporate background I have. Prior to that, it was very agency focused. So the biggest thing for my agency days when I was doing freelancing was checking out the paperwork I signed when they hired me. Like, you've got this whole sheaf of papers that you go through and sign. And 9 times out of 10, when you're at an agency, there's going to be a non-compete in there. So during my agriculture agency days, I could not work for other ag clients if there was any sort of capacity that they would want to hire my agency. So I could maybe work for a blogger that didn't have a whole lot of budget, or an artisan beeswax candle and soap maker that does that as a side hustle of their own. But there was no way I was ever going to be able to freelance for like a large organization that could have hired that agency I worked at. The next step is check your company guidelines. Are there, conflict of interest clauses in there? If there are, then you probably want to talk to your direct supervisor about whether or not what you want to do is considered a conflict of interest.
Right.
And I hate being that person that's like, oh, check your legal, dot your I's, cross your T's. But the reality is, like, that paperwork exists there to serve as a guideline. And if you use it, it's usually pretty good at keeping your nose clean.
Mm-hmm.
And when in doubt, just talk to your boss. If they're cool, they'll get it. They'll help you navigate it. I actually, at my current job, have gone to my boss before with some clients and been like, hey, do we think this is a conflict of interest? And he would be like, that one's cutting it a little close. I wouldn't take them. Or, no, you're fine. Go for it. And, I trusted his word and have never had an issue with it.
Yeah, I think that communication is key. And if you're not somewhere where you feel like you can have open communication with your boss, that's probably a whole nother episode, probably a whole nother concern. But I do think that communication and drawing those boundaries is key. Well, I know you gave the advice earlier that if you're going to be asking for free mentorship and advice, at least be mindful of their time. So I'm going to be mindful of yours because I've been asking you for free advice here. First of all, I need to get your Twitter handle because I follow you on Twitter and you're a fantastic follow, and everybody who's watching should follow you as well. What's your Twitter handle?
Kelly Stanze, Kelly Stanze as in zebra, E.
All right, good deal. Well, I've got it up there for those of you watching, for those of you listening. It's at Kelly Stanze on Twitter. Definitely give Kelly a follow. Where else can folks that are watching or listening keep up with your adventures?
That's really the best place to do it. I'm not super active on LinkedIn anymore. I've got like 12 half-written posts on there that I need to revisit. Apologies in advance that most of my tweets are about being pregnant right now. But I do share out nuggets about ag, about SEO, about the day life. If you like rescue pets, you'll see those a lot there as well. And then you can find me on Instagram at the same account. But again, that's not going to be as work related.
Cool. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you have a full-time job and obviously a side hustle and a lot going on. So I really appreciate you being on the show. And I know this has been a lot of value because I get asked a lot about the side hustle thing. So I think it's really, really helpful information. So thank you very, very much. And thank you for those who tuned in live. And again, I'll just give one more plug to make sure you're subscribed to AgGrad on YouTube and the AgGrad Live podcast so that you can catch all of these episodes. So Kelly, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining AgGrad Live. Visit aggrad.com, that's AGGRAD, to join the community, create your profile, and learn more about careers in the agriculture industry.